We're going to go back to the definition. First of all, I wanted to say, for those of you that read the paper that I wrote, the paper was not in response to anything that has been discussed here, or any of the other papers. I wrote that before I saw any of the papers. So if any of you interpreted it that I was saying that it was impossible to create a good definition and that we hadn't one.
You were the first one. Bill was the first one sending you a paper. Bill and Danny, you were the first ones.
So just to clear that up ahead of time. So it's always great to come to events like this, and one of the things that happens is we get to tell stories. And we tell stories about George Osawa, and we tell stories about Michio Kushi, and we tell stories about the good old days and the bad old days, and we tell all these stories. And we talk about things that were discussed, decided, and written down in stone, sometimes 60, 70 years ago, sometimes a few years ago. And it occurs to me, always at these events, that this is like a lot of luggage that we're carrying around, And some of that is really good luggage. It's very informative, much of it, and useful too. And it's part of our macrobiotic tradition, if you will. One of the things that's, for me, been important over the last few years, and only important to me, yes, as far as I know, and that is to try to dig down underneath a lot of those macrobiotic stories and ask myself, what's really under there, right? What's really underneath it? If we strip away all of the ideology, and there's a lot of ideology there, if we strip away all the ideology, I'm using your, if we strip away all the ideology, if we strip away all of the macrobiotic jargon, if we strip away even all the macrobiotic history, right? What is it that we're really about here, right? And that's something that has intrigued me for a long time. And it's intrigued me in a particular way. And that particular way is that when macrobiotics first came into my life, one of the things that I recognized in it, even though it was not said, it was not stated in the books that I read, or in the book, the little yellow book that I read, was that this was an ecological enterprise. And one of the reasons that I thought that was because my father particularly was what I would call an ecologist. Right? He was a student of nature. Right? He was a commercial fisherman, and when he wasn't fishing in the ocean, he was hiking and climbing in the mountains and fishing in lakes and rivers. We never worked out what he had against fish, but killing fish was one of his hobbies, right? Whether it was commercially or whether it was for pleasure, right? So what he did instill in me was a love of nature, and that led me to start reading things by some American poets like Gary Snyder and other people that were interested in ecology and early ecologists, early ecological writing. Thoreau, etc., people that were reflecting on nature. Macrobiotics fit right into that for me. And then I encountered Michio, right? And it was interesting because Michio had all these great ideas, mind-blowing ideas. Michio could start talking about, as many of you know, he could start talking about your teeth and end up in a galaxy, right? Think, how the hell did he do that? How did he get from my teeth to the galaxy, right? And back again, right? How did he connect all of that stuff, right? But the one thing that was always a little bit of an issue with me was that Michio didn't like nature. He really didn't like nature, right? He wasn't comfortable in nature. I even almost forced him into nature on 2 occasions, and he hated it, right? He couldn't wait to get to a coffee shop and smoke a pack of cigarettes and drink a cup of coffee, right? He didn't like it. He wasn't there. And so that part was always a little bit of a missing for me in our macrobiotic studies. So it's one of the things that informs my own approach to things. Now, many people have talked over the last days about this unique social situation that we're in. Because for the last 50 years that I've been involved in macrobiotics, one of the mantras that keeps coming up is that, oh my God, science doesn't doesn't agree with us. Science rejects us. If only we had science on our side. I've heard this over and over and over again. And now we're in a situation where there's so much confusion about nutrition. There's probably more confusion about nutrition than any other realm of lifestyle, right? Am I right here? Right?
Yeah.
You know, you can bring up nutrition and it's paleo or it's raw or it's this or it's that or the other. People know all of this information that's out there. And here we are macrobiotically, and we're actually busting out of ourselves, wanting to share this stuff that we have. Hey, we have this stuff over here, which is really great. And for some reason, we don't seem to be getting it out there. And we look for reasons. And some of the reasons that we look for have been discussed here, and they come down to kind of a marketing idea, right? And that's cool, because nobody likes to make money doing something that they like to do more than me, right? I love doing that, right? Don't you? Right? I love doing that, right? But there's a question underneath that, and the question is when we start talking about macrobiotics, well, there's two questions really. When we start talking about macrobiotics, we're talking about two different things here. One of them is the way that we utilize the science which is already here, which you were talking about the other day, because there's this huge pile of science over here now that's saying, look over here in the same direction that we're standing in. Over here is where the answers lie. It's over here in what is vaguely described as plant-based nutrition, which means nothing, right? But over here, plant-based nutrition, this is where the truth lies about health and healing, right? And the other part of it is that we have this kind of, all of a sudden, a backwash against that, right? Which we see in a lot of macrobiotic teaching that goes on right now. And it's almost as if the science, all of a sudden now the science agrees with us, so we don't want to agree with the science, right? And the part of the science that we really don't want to agree with is the part about animal food, right? That's the part that really hangs us up, right? It's one of the parts, right? Then he would say it's oil as well, but it's definitely the animal food part. It really gets under our skin, you know, like that. Why? How are they saying that we should look over here and we should look at grains, beans, vegetables, etc.? But they're saying we can't eat animals, not only land animals, which we were cool with that because Osawa said that was not good, so we'll go with that, right? We'll go with not eating a cow, right? But a fish, you know, fish is kind of, you know, it's a different sort of thing, right? It's a different sort of thing. So I brought this up last year, which was very interesting conversation that would not stop, right? No, am I right? It was a conversation that would not stop. So I'm trying to identify here some of the things that I feel could inform an ethic about our practice. Now, I want to be very clear about this. I'm not saying that anybody that does anything with their eating is wrong or bad. Right? I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is there's a conversation to be had about the ethic of our practice in the context of the environment. Right? Within that context, there's a huge conversation that needs to take place. Because right now it seems to me, and it's just my interpretation, that we're not congruent with our attitudes about where we came from and with our practice. Now, most of us would agree that we all believe in natural law. Am I right? Okay, we believe that there's natural law. We believe everything's connected. We say that, right? That comes up all the time. Everything's connected. We believe that there has to be health or harmony. I changed that word balance to harmony, and I don't know if it popped back up as balance, right? And that we respect that things change. The universe changes around us. One of the things that changes radically is the environment that we live in has changed hugely since George Osawa was writing. And it's changed hugely since even Micho was doing his work, right? Not through his whole life, but when he was really doing his work, right? It's changed radically. And we have to ask ourselves, are we adapting to those changes? And are we adapting in a way that is congruent with some of our beliefs? See, I believe that macrobiotics is one of the original types of deep ecology. And deep ecology is a branch of ecological studies, which basically is built around some very simple premises. One of them is that we have to acknowledge in our lives that we are part of the environment and that's not an abstraction. That there is a continuum between our life and life in nature. Right? And it's difficult for us to see that sometimes because we live in urban environments. So we're not out in nature a lot, but nature is still in here. Right? And nature is still going. Circadian rhythms, time, right? We wanted to talk about that with you, about time, because there's this whole thing of time that goes on within the body that is geared to the movement of the planets, the movement of the sun, everything else, and that's a scientific fact that happens. Right? So we know that there is this relationship that we have with nature, and that in deep ecology, one of the things that's being said is we have to acknowledge that most of human history, for the last at least 10,000 years, maybe 20,000 years, has been based around a premise that human beings are the apex of creation. You got all these animals, and then ding, you got human beings up here. And the human beings are special. They're so special, right? And then everything that's underneath that is not special at all, right? It has no soul, it has no value. There's nothing in there. It's just stuff. It's just animals. They can be used, they can be not used. It doesn't make any difference. It's plants. They're all for our service. And deep ecology goes in the other direction and says that's a speciesist idea. What happens when that happens is we separate ourselves off from nature. I think macrobiotics is unique in this fact because in macrobiotics, one of the things that we've been taught and that we do and that we talk about when we're together is that we feed the nature within us in our biome, and that there should be a continuation between what happens within the internal ecology and the external ecology. And that's one of the ways that we learn, because this is our workshop, right? And we learn the laws of nature through our food. That's one of the ways that we learn. Right? When we look at what's happening in the world today, one of the things that we see is that there is a huge anti-nature move. I want to put to you that people like the Donald Trumps of the world, the Monsantos of the world, these are people who hate nature. They hate nature. They're uncomfortable with it. They want to destroy it. They don't care about it at all. All they want to do is utilize it, manipulate it, and take advantage of it. And so if we're going to promise an alternative to all of that, we have to figure out how to live in a way that loves nature and respects nature in its totality. And one of those things has to be a reflection in the way that we choose the foods that we eat. Now, since we love Osawa so much, macrobiotics is sort of like Christianity. You can always find something to rationalize whatever you believe in the Bible. Right? Did you ever notice that? I mean, it doesn't make any difference what you believe. You can find, if you believe homosexuality is evil, you find something in the Bible about that. You know, if you believe everybody should love everybody, you find something in the Bible about that. This is a quote from George Osawa, which I think is a pretty interesting one. Right? And that is that macrobiotics is not the kind of sentimental vegetarianism that hemoglobic foods are avoided for biological and physiological reasons. And the reason that those foods, and those are blood foods, that those foods are avoided because the food that we eat creates our mentality. And when we eat animal food, we're taking in the hormones that are not the thinking hormones. We don't think that particular and peculiar way that we have the potential in human beings. We're not feeding, we're not nourishing that particular capacity. So that particular capacity, I would think, is something that we do want to nourish. And so it has to be part of the conversation about what we do. Does anybody know how much time I have?
5 more minutes.
An hour.
Huh?
More, another 5.
Another 5, good, okay. Just make it. Home stretch here. So there are a few things that are common in terms of what I would determine ethical nutrition. Every time ethics is brought up in terms of macrobiotics, we talk about it in terms of what happens in a consultation room or in a teaching situation. Right? I want to suggest that there's a bigger ethic than that. And that's an ethic that's reflected in our practice. And the ethic that's reflected in our practice has to do with a number of things you might add on to this list, but I would say one of them, of course, is personal health. We have to be healthy. Right? We have to have food that's healthy and that serves our health and healing. But it's also food that has to serve social justice. And most of us are clear on that. The commercial food industry is not just socially. It kills people. And it kills more brown people and young people than anybody else, right? Not only directly, but also in terms of economic manipulation. Environmental health. If we don't eat a diet that is suitable for the environment, and the whole environment, we're missing the boat. Right? Because the food that heals us doesn't heal us because it's special superfood. The food that heals us because it brings us into a homeostasis with the environment. We get it backwards. Nutrition's got it backwards, right? That's why the food is healing food. It's healing food because it's what nature wants us to eat, right? When we eat that way, we're eating in conjunction with the environment and we benefit from it. That's, somebody mentioned the other day, karma, right? That is karma right there. That's cause and effect, right? And I put in here nonviolence, which some people might object to. Right? I don't know why, but some people would object to nonviolence because macrobiotics doesn't make those statements usually. But I would say that there's a principle of nonviolence that needs to be there. And that nonviolence is not only to nature, but it's also to the creatures of nature. No? How can we avoid that conclusion? It's difficult for my head to get around that. Right? Now, there have been 4 minutes now? 2 minutes. Oh, damn. Yeah. So anyway, well, you can review them in my paper, but there were some objections that came up to this. And I think I've addressed most of the objections in the paper that I wrote. But I have to say that to me, I didn't get the objections. I went back and reflected on them. I know that many of you think that I don't reflect on things. But I do. I went back and I reflected on it and I thought, I just don't get it. I'm not getting it. Why do we have tradition? You say, well, I heard somebody told me, well, Micho put fish at the top of the pyramid as a possibility. Right? First it was a possibility, then it was every 2 times a week, then all of a sudden meat and eggs showed up there. I'm asking, so why did that happen? Because I remember some of that conversation. I'll tell you why it happened. It happened for marketing purposes. Yeah. Some of the same reasons that drive some of the conversations that I think that we have when we're together. Trying to think, what will market well, right? Mm-hmm. Well, this is kind of weird because really what's trending, as we've been told, more than anything else in terms of food is veganism. Yeah. Some of you respond very poorly to veganism because you get this kind of wimpy idea about it, right? And I agree with you in most cases, right? I've been to several big vegan events, and Marlene and I have spoken at big vegan events, and a lot of them are sick puppies, right? And we have so much to teach them, to share with them about what we do, and they're very receptive to it, right? And this is where nutrition is going. We might not like it, but this is where nutrition is going. It's going in that direction. And so not only are we rejecting much of the science that's coming up, but we also reject actually what the social trend is, and it's a social trend driven by health concerns and environmental concerns. And we should be on top of both of those. The fact that we can be on top of both of them at the same time gives us a huge advantage in terms of teaching people about macrobiotics, about the way of life, about nature and humanity working together. And so we have an opportunity here, and we get to decide. We get to decide. What do we want to do? Where do we want to go? What do we want to do when we get there? So I just put that forward to you as Greg would say, an inquiry. Part of the inquiry, right? It's part of the inquiry of what we're doing. If we don't learn how to take it all apart, put all of the stuff that's good stuff off to one side, and then put it back together and say, okay, this stuff was really good. With the juicy stuff, we put that back in there again, so that we can respect the spirit of the tradition without deifying it, right? Because that's a big mistake, right? It's a big mistake. So I thank you very much for your attention.